Hey there, this is BLUFOR here. I'd like to give everybody an overview of the terrain on this map. And we've seen a lot of overhead maps, but it doesn't really capture what this terrain looks like on the ground level. This map is very, very cluttered. There's a lot of low rises, there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of houses that obstruct our line of sight. But there's a couple of really dominant positions that are good observation points and are also really good fighting positions with long range all the way across the map that our tanks can use. So I'll give you a breakdown of some of the fighting positions we can use, and then I'll take a look at some of the Russian lines and some of the obstacles they have to their movement. So starting off on our end of the map right here, you can see our deployment area here, the Russian deployment area there. So let's start off with the Allen Forest. So the Allen Forest is not a particularly dominant fighting position in any way. It does have some line of sight. You can see here and here, looking south towards the Russian lines. But it's a good position to hold reserves in because it has overhead cover, which makes it harder for Russian UAVs and harder for Russian close air support aircraft to attack us. It's also a decent spot. You can hide man-pads units in the fringes here, and they can cover pretty much all of C and D Company. Moving forward here, you can see probably one of the most important pieces of terrain right here, which is Eisenhower Junction. As you can see, Eisenhower Junction has excellent lines of sight towards the open ground in the center of the map. If the Russians do try to make a concerted push out of their spawn with vehicles, this is an excellent position to counter that. Another reason why Eisenhower Junction is important, as you can see here, is Yankees Way. Yankees Way, you're not able to see down Yankees Way going from our spawn to the Russian spawn. However, if you look further down it, you can see there's a low rise that blocks terrain. But this is a good position to put vehicles in hull down. You can hide the vehicle's hull here, just the turret standing up. So this is an important position for people deploying in Eisenhower Junction to keep in mind. Obviously, this terrain cuts both ways. We can see down it, but that means the Russians can also see down it, and we can move down it. So be aware of that. You can see those of you in C Company Hob would be interested in this terrain right here. It's fairly cluttered. Looking at the ground level, you can see there's not really especially good lines of sight out of this area. However, there's a lot of the excellent positions to hide infantry. You can put infantry behind these hedges, you can put them in these buildings, so it might be wise to have an infantry screen deployed in this area, along with maybe a couple of Bradleys. Alright, we'll move over. This right here you can see is the Chaffee Forest. The Chaffee Forest doesn't really have good lines of sight, with the possible exception of this position here that has reasonably good positioning towards the east. So it's a decent position to defend there. It's also, like I said earlier, a good position to hide reserves in. Good overhead cover and fairly centrally positioned towards our lines. Another good reserve position here is the Ornat Woods. Now, the Ornat Woods don't have very good line of sight out of them, as you can see from the ground level. There's a low rise right here, and there's some trees and houses that really obstruct vision out of here. However, the Ornat Woods is good because, again, it has overhead cover, which makes it hard to spot and attack units here, and it's right near Armstrong Avenue, which allows us to quickly move forces up and down if they need help. Yes, Armstrong Avenue is a little bit exposed, but because of the rise in terrain along the center of the map, and because of some of the trees and houses here, it's enough where fast-moving units should be able to quickly dash short distances. Alright, we'll move over here and take a look at the 100-Acre Wood. 100-Acre Wood is one of my favorite fighting positions on this map because it has three primary axes which you can see out of. There's an axis that looks towards the North Farm objective, one towards the North Road Junction, and one looking over here towards the western end of the map. So let's take a look at the ground level for each of these. This is the one looking towards the eastern end of the map. As you can see, it has excellent lines of sight looking towards the enemy right here. A vehicle like an Abrams or a Bradley can see basically enemy units moving toward this keyhole position here. In the center, we have a similarly good line of sight position, where any units moving towards the North Road Junction can be engaged out of this area here. And again, we have another decent fighting position here on this side of the map, where you can see enemy units moving through here. Obviously, you'd want to move your troops towards the edge of the forest a little bit. That'll give them better lines of sight. I also don't want to dismiss the fact there's some really, really good fighting positions out here. You can use vehicles, hide behind the flank of these houses here, and use that to engage enemy targets moving through this area here. So not only is the 100-Acre Woods a good defensive position, you have some excellent fighting positions near these houses. I want to call special attention to these two houses right here. Both of them are two-story houses with windows look over the entire center and east of the map. excellent observation positions, as well as potential firing positions for Javelin ATGMs, since those missiles can be fired from indoors. All right, we'll take a look over and move at the Corpse Copse. The Corpse Copse is a much smaller group of trees, which limits concealment and maneuver. However, it does have two good lines of sight I want to call attention to. The first is looking towards the east. You can see this is the general direction of Mingus Woods. Any enemy units trying to emerge from that area can be engaged from positions in the Corpse Copse. Looking over to the west and the center, we have similarly good lines of sight towards enemy movement areas in the center. Again, also don't discount the houses here, using them as flank cover for units hiding here. Another good position, and I think Ace, you may want to consider putting troops here. We've had discussions about this in Roll20 before. This is a good fighting position, as you pointed out, looking, again, towards the west and the center, but also looking towards the east and the south. Some excellent fighting positions. It may be wise to put a few units here, although that'll be up to you at the end of the day. But if the Russians do attempt to slide out of these woods, that's a good fighting position. Jaguars, I want to give you the opportunity to look at some potential hide sites for your snipers. We have this position right here. This is the Beecher screen. Reasonable lines of sight out of here towards Mingus Woods. Obviously, Mingus Woods themselves, although it's probably the Russians will put scout teams here as well. But there's also some pretty good little sites. For example, this house right here, this set of hedges, and this house right here as well. So there are some good lines of sight for sniper screens and for scout screens on this flank here. One other position I want to call attention to is the Marley's Trees position. The Marley's Trees position is a good position, has good lines of sight, looking towards the center, looking towards the east. Also, again, has the advantage of being near Armstrong Avenue for quick redeployment, as well as having overhead cover that can protect us from Russian UAVs and any cast they might want to show up. So this is the rough overview of our map and the fighting positions that we have. We have some great positions in the woods. We have some good houses for OPs that can also be used as cover for our armor. We do have some cluttered terrain in our west. I think it's pretty clear that in terms of at least Eisenhower Junction and some of the surrounding areas, that the west is an excellent position for us to leverage a defense from. Let's take a look at some of the Russian lines. The Russians, as you can see from the overhead map, and you can see more closely here, suffer from a couple of serious limitations on their maneuver. The Russians can move tracked vehicles through these woods. They can't move wheeled vehicles very easily. And even for tracked vehicles, pathfinding tends to want to push them down these roads. You can see Yankees Way here and Red Sox Road right here. This really limits their ability to maneuver. It forces them to have them much more likely of being bunched up. One possibility they may attempt is to try to put ATGM teams, sniper teams, or some other kind of fire support teams in these woods right here. As you can see, for the western woods, line of sight out of these woods is not especially good. They really can't look into our lines. However, if we do go on the offensive, this is something we have to keep in mind. To Keen, other artillery people, this is a consideration we may want to either smoke or suppress with indirect fire before we attack. All right. Let's take another look at the eastern side of their lines. Again, they suffer from fairly serious limitations. You can see right here, this is Rangers Road. This right here is Pirates Road. Again, serious limitations on what they can do. There's forest, it's muddy, they can't move tracked vehicles through it very easily given the pathfinding issues, which means they're really forced, if they want to do a major offensive operation, to move through this gap here or through this gap here. And as I've showed you earlier, many of the primary defensive positions like Eisenhower Junction allow us to lock down any effort to move through the center of the map here. I know there's been some expressions of concern about the possibility of them moving through Mingus Woods. Again, this is what they have to go through in order to get there. That's enough for really only 2 or 3 vehicles moving abreast, and giving pathfinding issues and the difficulties doing a play-by-post game, it's going to be challenging to move a lot of vehicles through there very quickly. One other concern that may be worth looking into is the possibility the Russians may attempt to deploy ATGM teams, sniper teams, some kind of heavy weapons teams in these woods. This is a valid concern. It's something I am worried about. I want to have UAVs up and spotting in this area. If we do see any movement there, or we do begin taking fire there, I want to immediately begin calling in artillery. So that's a broad overview of the maps and the positions in this game. We have some excellent positions we can move to within turn 1, about 10 to 15 seconds of the clock starting. The Russians have some really serious limitations on their movement, which makes a serious offensive attack on their part difficult and easy to chop up for us. So that's pretty much it for me.